During the 17th century, beside the vast waters of the York River, a small city was established in 1691 by the Act for Ports, a law that created designated trade towns across Virginia. The cost, 10,000 pounds of sweet-scented tobacco packed in barrels from nearby plantations. Named after the ancient city of York in Yorkshire, northern England, 50 acres of land formed this newly established waterfront town. Painstakingly ordered by the Virginia General Assembly, this small port would soon become a prosperous outpost for exporting tobacco to England. Divided into 85 lots, with a selling price of 180 pounds of tobacco each, it didn't take long for this little harbor town to grow. By the mid-18th century, hundreds of buildings and nearly 2,000 residents lived within its boundaries. It wasn't until the Revolutionary War's final siege, fought on the very soil of Yorktown, that the area's tobacco trade dwindled away and shifted elsewhere. On a scorching hot summer day, I drove into the city and made my way toward its most historic road.
This town I'm walking through has seen it all, from booming commerce to cannon fire to the birth of a nation. Today I'm in historic Yorktown, and I plan to do a scenic walking tour along its entire main street, where colonial homes, shops, and stories still line the street from long ago.
This historic road, perched on a bluff above the floodplain, is lined with 18th century homes, shops, and buildings that survived the war, alongside carefully restored landmarks, the sacred lots where houses once stood, the pathways where busy merchants once traveled, and later 19th and 20th century residences.
Along the way, I plan to explore the lives of those who built, lived, and fought here. And who knows, maybe we'll veer off the beaten path to try to track down some of the hidden locations that are lesser known throughout the city.
Join me for an occasion of historical significance, a scenic and insightful walk along historic Main Street in Yorktown, Virginia.
Man, right here engraved into the brick, RD 1749.
Where surviving traces of the past offer a window into the town's colonial roots and its role in America's fight for independence.
And you've got a cannonball there,
where the most telling places are easy to overlook.
Inside this garden area, I've heard there's a bust of Cornwallis,
a street that has seen more than most will ever know.
So come along with me here in the heat of summer with a little sweat on my brow. Let's see what Yorktown has to tell us. And our first stop along our tour is one of Yorktown's go-to taverns. We're here at Swan Tavern.
A convenient location just a block from the waterfront and steps from the bustling wharf of the 1700s. Swan Tavern sat directly across from the old colonial courthouse. In its heyday, it served food, drink, and probably no shortage of town gossip, welcoming locals and travelers alike, some arriving by ship from ports along the Chesapeake.
And it says here the most prominent tavern in Yorktown during the 18th century was the Swan Tavern, which opened for business around 1722 under the ownership of Thomas Nelson and Joseph Walker. This tavern would eventually pass through the Nelson family to one of Yorktown's most famous residents, Thomas Nelson Jr., whose home still stands along Main Street, and a house we'll be visiting here shortly. And from what I've read, it was more than a bar. It was also an auction house of sorts, as they would auction off things like rum and sugar and coffee. And here's some tavern artifacts uncovered by the National Park Service in 1933, as well as the reconstruction of the Swan Tavern kitchen atop its original foundations as seen there. So just like most taverns throughout the colonies, They were pretty much the town square and the news hub of the city. And probably perfect location for a sailor to let loose, take off his hat from a long voyage on the seas, come in and have a pint inside Swan Tavern. Now, this version you see today is a reconstruction from 1935 and part of the Park Service's effort to bring Yorktown's colonial character, so to say, back to life. But it's still a pretty interesting building to see and imagine what it would have looked like in the prime of original Yorktown. All right, let's continue our tour, walking towards Main and Church Street, straight ahead, which is officially the gated off portion of Main Street. We're in the section right before the marked off spot where pedestrians go and no motor vehicles can roam.
The next stop along historic Main Street in Yorktown was the first 19th century building I encountered on my walk, a place known as Bircher Cottage. Today, the building is mostly used for business purposes and is owned by the National Park Service.
You can almost tell it was still holding on to its 18th century influence, as it does have those colonial style shutters. I like the light up above the doorway and the big swing shutters on the lower set of windows. And it looks like there's one outbuilding toward the back of the lot. I'm not sure the purpose of it, but this here appears to be a later addition to the main house, and at first glance doesn't look like it would be from the 19th century. Let's continue down Main Street and see what we can discover.
Next door to the cottage stood a small wooden residence, wrapped in murky details, but carrying just enough of a story to spark curiosity and imagination.
It's definitely a hot one out here today. But this house here, according to an online map, says there used to be a cannon outside this house, which I can't seem to find any documentation on.
The French king had the cannon that was once positioned outside of this small house, as well as others, shipped to Portsmouth, New Hampshire back in 1777 as a sign of support for the American cause. The artillery he sent gave the Americans a much-needed upper hand and firepower against the British.
And like I said, I don't know exactly what this little house is or what the history is behind it, but it's right there beside the Bircher Cottage. But when all else fails, take a little walk behind the rear of the house and see if there's any interesting finds.
Although the backyard didn't reveal any discoveries tied to this mysterious location, the large two-story house next door, surrounded by its brick wall, caught my attention. It would become the next stop on my walking tour. This house once served as Yorktown's customs office. Local merchants and ship captains brought cargo lists and paid taxes on everything they carried. Tobacco going out, or rum, cloth, and spices coming in. Nothing could be loaded or unloaded on the York River until taxes were paid inside these walls.
There's some signage up there. It says, in honor of Comte de Grasse, Admiral of the French fleet, whose landing of troops and the blockade of the Chesapeake Bay were decisive factors leading to the surrender of the British forces at Yorktown on October 19th, 1781. And this is an original building. There is a marker here that says early colonial custom house built in 1706. And the house was built by Richard Ambler.
Richard Ambler, one of Virginia's wealthiest men at the time, ran this house as Yorktown's collector of the port, making sure every tax was collected and every shipment accounted for.
And right here in the brick are the initials RD 1749. Or maybe that's an A. Could this be the initials of Richard Ambler himself? Who knows? I'm always intrigued by brick, just thinking about the person who laid this who stacked it long ago. And as a visitor in the 21st century, makes you wonder what he was thinking when he laid that brick, that all these centuries later, someone like myself and you out there would be here visiting and seeing their handiwork still standing strong in this old brick wall that encircles the backyard area, enclosing the entire garden, still doing its job after all these years. And here's a little outbuilding in the far rear side of the custom house. Not sure if that's an original structure or what the purpose of the outbuilding is, but it does seem to be a pretty peaceful, scenic location on the rear yard. Here we are at the side entrance of Thomas Nelson Jr.'s home. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, governor during the siege of Yorktown, and all in on the independence that the Americans sought. And here we are at the side of his house.
Standing this close to the entranceway of the Thomas Nelson Jr. house for the first time was mesmerizing. A true patriot once lived here, whose remarkable story deserves far more recognition than it receives.
And pretty much the majority of this is original. There's portions that are restored, but a lot of this is the original home. There's a local legend that says Nelson told Washington to fire on his house here if the British were inside. Now, there's no solid proof that he said this to Washington, but the impact marks of some cannon fire can be found on the side of the house. We're walking up on that right now, give you a better look at it. But the cannonballs that are in the side of the house aren't original, but they were lodged where the original impact marks from cannon fire during the siege, where it happened at. And you've got a cannonball there. And just above that, you can see the impact mark of another cannon. And then way at the top of the building is another impact mark with another cannonball lodged in it. And you can see that one way up there in between those two windows. And the cannonball scars out here are more than just damage. They're receipts for the cost of the revolution. Here I am walking in the backyard of Nelson's house. And it's important to know that Nelson wasn't just a politician. He was a wartime general of the Virginia militia, and even used his own money to fund troops and the war, as well as govern Virginia during all the chaos of Yorktown, which is a pretty impressive lineup of things to be responsible for, as well as being such a high status figure in the port city of Yorktown. You can almost see Nelson Jr. walking out of this side door, coming down this long flight of stairs. Something about this shaded side porch area, it just seems wrapped up in some history. And it's definitely a dead giveaway when you see brickwork like this. And these massive cornerstones, they make you realize you're witnessing an original colonial home, a living relic connecting us directly to the hands that built it centuries ago. So much life was carried out in this house and on this property. And truly amazing to be in such a historic place where so much history took place. Back here is a find I've never noticed, but in the rear of the yard as well, it looks like it could be the impact mark of another cannon. So this house definitely took some fire during the siege of Yorktown. Another pretty amazing thing to realize is that Nelson Jr. led Yorktown's own Tea Party, similar to the Boston Tea Party, and it involved protesting British taxes way before things boiled over. And I'll take a quick stroll through the garden area beside the Nelson house, which is a pretty extravagant garden. But inside this garden area, I've heard there's a bust of Cornwallis near the corner of the garden, so I'm going to try to find it real quick and see what it says. Over here, well, not there. Nice and shady back here. This is an extremely hot day, but having a fun time journeying through here to find his bust, if I can find it. Can't seem to locate it. And I think that's it. Lurking behind this tree trunk, here's the bust of British Lieutenant General Cornwallis. Let's see what it says. A testimonial of affection of Virginia for the mother country, erected by the Virginia Yorktown Sesquicentennial Commission, Earl Cornwallis, commander of the British forces. So not something you would typically find if you're just taking a gradual stroll through Main Street. This one is actually tucked within the garden of Governor Thomas Nelson Jr. As remarkable of a life as he led, Nelson actually died in 1789 in poor health and in debt, and he was buried nearby at Grace Church, which is not far from his house, a place we plan to go to probably near the end of this video. Continuing our tour, right next to Nelson Jr.'s house is another historic home here in downtown Yorktown, potentially one of the most historic homes. It's the Sessions House.
Built on an original plot of land sold to Thomas Sessions during the early years of Yorktown, the house endured centuries of war and history, including the Revolution and the Civil War, and even welcomed World War I visitors.
This house hosted admirals, Navy leaders, and even a few U.S. presidents, as it was a popular location in Yorktown and a great gathering space for prominent figures and high-ranking military men. A man named Dr. Matthew Pope owned it in the 1760s, and he was the personal physician of the royal governor over in Williamsburg. And this house is definitely rare, and it's one of the few homes in Yorktown that predates the Revolution and is still standing today. Just by looking at the exterior, you can sense the age of this house, as I believe it's one of the oldest in the inner city of Yorktown, so you can really tell it stood for centuries. It's got two of these large T-shaped chimneys, which are more than likely originals. And I'm not entirely sure if this old brick wall dates back to the 18th century, but this section of it does appear to be old and still standing firm as a protective barrier surrounding the house. Later in the 20th century, a man and woman by the name of Conway and Catherine Shield eventually bought the place, and Catherine founded the Yorktown branch of the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities and ran it here for 25 years. And today it's still owned by the Shield family. So over a century of history, and it's still in the same hands.
Walking down Yorktown's Main Street, the 18th century homes seem to nod at their 20th century neighbors, like old friends keeping watch over a street that has grown and changed around them. The next stop took me to a home constructed in the 1930s by Admiral and Mrs. Ballantyne. From its front yard, the approaching Victory Monument rose above the horizon. And like the Sessions House, this 20th century build sits on an original half-acre lot from back when Yorktown was first established as a port town. I learned this house was constructed using materials from a house originally built in King and Queen County around 1792, giving it a direct connection to Virginia's 18th century past. Nearing the south end of Main Street, I was approaching another home steeped in early 20th century history and alive with more modern musical fanfare.
And this was a 20th century house as well, built in 1935 by J.W. Hornsby, who was a local businessman back then, whose family still apparently retains ownership of it today. And if that last name rings a bell, it could be because you're familiar with his music. Among J.W. Hornsby's grandchildren is Grammy award-winning musician Bruce Hornsby, who has many top 40 hits to his credit and is still actually performing live to this very day. So very interesting to learn that Bruce Hornsby's family owns the Hornsby House that sits along Main Street in Yorktown.
The O'Hara House, on the next lot over, is a white frame house that was built just before 1920 by the family of the present owner. Over time, the house has been carefully cared for, blending its original early 20th century style with updates that make it both comfortable and inviting. Walking past, it's easy to imagine the generations who lived here, maintaining the home and shaping its character through decades of change, while still reflecting the home's historical roots. Passing the final house on the south side of Main Street, I walked by Bacon Street, wondering if the name was linked to the notorious Nathaniel Bacon of the 1676 Bacon's Rebellion, or perhaps his elder cousin also named Nathaniel Bacon. As I crossed over to the other side of Main Street, the Victory Monument rose before me, a lasting reminder of Yorktown's surrender and the town's role in ending the Revolutionary War.
Standing this close, you can really appreciate just how tall this towering symbol of our nation's independence truly is. It's definitely a sight to see when visiting Yorktown. And here it speaks of Congress ordering a resolution to have the monument built all the way back in 1781. And after more than 100 years, it was finally completed in 1884. And it's officially called the Victory Monument. But really, it's a giant reminder that Yorktown was sealed with a deal, with the Articles of Capitulation rendering the terms and eventually the Treaty of Paris officially signing off America's independence from the British Crown. And you definitely can't miss it when you're exploring the area. I believe the monument stands at just over 90 feet tall, and you can really see this from all different vantage points throughout the entire city. And it's meant to be seen just like the message it sends, a message of victory and sacrifice. And that statue, all the way at the top of the monument, is Lady Liberty, with her arms reaching outward as a sign of prosperity for the new nation. and beneath her are 38 stars that represent each state in the Union at the time the monument was designed. And then there's 13 female figures joining hands, which symbolizes the unity of the original 13 colonies. Tucked behind it, you get this amazing scenic view of the York River from a distance in all its glory. And this is the tree behind the Victory Monument. And if this isn't an old tree, I don't know what is. Look at the size of the branches on this and how far they extend outward. And by the width of this trunk, it wouldn't surprise me if it's been here for potentially hundreds of years, maybe even before the Revolution. It's a massive tree. I'm not sure if the footage is going to reveal how big it truly is. It really makes me wonder if any founding fathers ever spent time under the shade of its branches. And when you near the end of Main Street past the Victory Monument, there's a road of great significance to Yorktown that you can venture out onto, known as Tobacco Road. And this is quite a significant road to Yorktown's history, dating way before the Revolution. This footbridge we're about to cross over, underneath it ran a road called Tobacco Road, and this is where all the crop growers and all the plantation owners would transport all of their tobacco, loads of tobacco, along this road that runs right underneath the bridge here. And it would take them straight to the port. So this was a heavily trafficked road in the 17th and 18th century. And every plantation nearby would have fed into this very road, Tobacco Road. If you were exporting tobacco, you were coming right down this pathway. You were headed right to the coast there of York River, ready to make your business transaction. And picture constant traffic, dust, wheels creaking from wagons, workers guiding the loads toward the docks. It all took place right underneath me. And the road looks pretty simple now, but it was the backbone of local economy well before the Revolution ever took place. And it's amazing to think you're standing above a highway of the 1700s, just without cars and just barrels and sweat and the hard work of men anxious to sell their cash crop for money to support their family and loved ones. It was the way of living back in the 17th and 18th century. Tobacco was extremely valuable and powered the economy of Yorktown. And then there's lookouts here with benches if you just want to sit and relax and let your imagination carry you back to a time when this road was heavily frequented by 17th and 18th century colonial people. Alright, so that completes one side of Main Street with a little detour down Tobacco Road for some history. Now let's head down the other side and see what historical findings we can find along the opposite side of Main Street. Let's go.
After a quick pause for a sudden shift in the weather pattern, I was back on my walkabout, approaching another colonial home.
And a little downpour just happened along the scenic walking tour, but I'm back on the road now, and we're coming up on the Dudley Diggs house, so let's take a closer look. And there's more to this home than meets the eye, including an intriguing discovery tied to the damage the town endured in 1781 during the war. Diggs was no lightweight. He actually helped write Virginia's first constitution and even once served as the lieutenant governor. And it's known that his political career sort of ended fast when he was captured by the British at Charlottesville in 1781 during the Revolutionary War. Here we are at the marker. let you know that Dudley Diggs built this classic Virginia Tidewater style home around 1760. The outbuildings, well house, kitchen, granary, and smokehouse are typical of those found in the colonial era, and the house was restored in 1960, and the outbuildings reconstructed by the National Park Service in the 1970s. The house took some serious hits during the siege of Yorktown, and there's actually cannonball damage that was still visible when it was restored in the 60s, and that is an image of that cannonball damage right there, only revealed during the restoration of the house. And here's the actual signature of Dudley Diggs. And this historic home was actually featured in an 1834 painting by John Gatsby Chapman. And on the far left of the artwork, you can see the house along with a few of its outbuildings. Another house that took impact from the siege of Yorktown, cannonballs flying into the city, and they didn't spare the Dudley Diggs house. It took a beating during the siege. And if it wouldn't have been for that reconstruction, they would have never known that it had been damaged. And we'll take a little walk back here and get a glimpse of his backyard. Hey, and look, peeking over the rooftops from back here, the Victory Monument can be seen standing tall in the distance, almost as if watching over the old colonial houses along historic Main Street. So it's pretty wild to think that this guy was writing laws one year and sitting in a British prison camp the next. So when you're looking at the Dudley Diggs house, you're not just looking at a house, you're looking at the rise and fall of one of Virginia's most important revolutionary voices.
In the 18th century, descending the bluff next to Dudley Diggs' home was a path that funneled people from Main Street down into the busy waterfront.
And here is the signage for the Great Valley. It says, before the American Revolution, this narrow footpath cut through the Great Valley and was a major thoroughfare that linked Yorktown's busy waterfront district with businesses and government offices on Main Street. And being that it's right beside Main Street, why not take a walk down a historic pathway and see what it's like to walk down the Great Valley. But this would have been the historic path that so many people from the 18th century would have traversed down. And look at this. You can almost feel the history on both sides of the ravine here. And it definitely wouldn't be far-fetched to think that British soldiers once slipped along this convenient hollow to keep watch over the town during the occupation of Yorktown. It's hard to imagine now, but this quiet path once pulsed with the energy of a trading town on the rise. Before the war, this trail would have been full of foot traffic, moving between the river and Main Street and potentially en route to pay taxes owed down at the custom house. Walking down this valley, you're literally walking the old artery of Yorktown's commerce. Pretty mesmerizing thought to think about. And at the top of the valley, back in the early 1700s, stood the busy Nelson stores. And I believe they were likely owned by the patriarch of the Nelson family in Yorktown, Old Scotch Tom Nelson. His family was quite prominent, including Thomas Nelson Jr., whose large brick home we visited earlier across the street, and it still remains one of the city's most recognizable landmarks. And it's known that in 1814, a fire tore through the waterfront, reaching parts of Main Street, and after that, Yorktown pretty much fizzled out, and quite honestly, it never really woke back up.
The now empty lot beside where the Nelson stores once stood holds few clues today. Only an old 1796 insurance policy survives, detailing the house that once stood here.
And this plot of land was where the home of William Nelson was. He was a merchant, a colonial politician, and even served as the governor of Virginia for a little while. And he was actually born right here in Yorktown in 1711 and was the oldest son of old Scotch Tom Nelson, the man who kicked off the family legacy in Virginia. And William ran the family's successful trade business and still found time to serve in the House of Burgesses, despite being a very busy man. One neat fact is in 1745, the king himself appointed him to the Royal Council of State, and that was a pretty big deal, and he actually advised the governor directly in that role. And when the royal governor died, William stepped up as acting governor during some pretty tense pre-revolution years. So it's pretty easy to forget that not everyone in power back then was a fiery rebel. Some, like Nelson, seemed to be sort of caught in the middle, although his stance supported the Patriot cause. And directly across the street from William Nelson's house is his son's house, Thomas Nelson Jr., who would go on to sign the Declaration of Independence. So the torch definitely got passed. William Nelson passed away in 1772, just a few years before the war started, and was buried right here in Yorktown. And when he died, the Virginia Gazette actually ran a commentary on him that said he was a patriot and an upright judge of good standing.
Next door to Nelson's place was another empty lot where a colonial house once stood.
It says the trustees to the Portland of Yorktown deeded the corner lot to Charles Cox, innholder and planner, in 1706. And Cox probably built the house pictured here before selling the property in 1729 to Thomas Nelson, in whose family it remained the next 75 years. The painting is based on the photographs of the 20 by 40 dwelling and store with smokehouse behind, made before it was destroyed a half-century ago.
A 1958 photocopy shows Main Street in the late 1870s with the Custom House left and the Cox House right. Standing there gave a glimpse into the contrast between past and present. Positioned at roughly the perspective of the photo was a great visual for a then and now moment. Continuing on to my next stop along Main Street, I sensed this colonial home held much history waiting to be uncovered.
And here we are outside the Cole Diggs house. On September 15th, 1720, Cole Diggs of Yorktown was sworn in as a member of the Royal Governor's Council, a powerful and prestigious political position in the colonial government that he held for 24 years. He was born in 1691, the same year Yorktown was established, and his wealth came primarily from producing a well-known brand of sweet-scented tobacco named after his grandfather, Edward Diggs. So in the booming economy of Yorktown, tobacco definitely made the economy soar. 2 decades before the Cole Diggs house stood here, a man by the name of Thomas Pate once purchased the lot and built his home here back in 1699. And for years, this house was thought to have been his original place, but architectural evidence now suggests it wasn't built until roughly 1720 when Cole Diggs owned the property. So it does seem like quite the historical mystery. We'll walk over here and see if we can get a peek into the backyard area. A lot of flowers on the side of the house. Yeah, we have a little entrance here we can tuck into. A nice spacious backyard at the Cole Diggs house, which now serves as a coffee shop. Pretty relaxing hideaway if you're in downtown Yorktown, taking a brisk walk through its main street. You can come out here and have a coffee, pastry, and just enjoy the Virginia air. And it does appear that the Cole Diggs house is sporting some rather nice silver pot there, silver coffee pot. Definitely fitting for the coffee shop it is in the modern day. And this house has worn a lot of hats over the years. It served as a warehouse, a residence. It was once a tea house and was even used as the First National Bank of Yorktown. The house was transformed in the 1920s into what you see today. And long before Colonial Williamsburg made the look famous, this house was already showing off red brick shutters and sash windows that give it its vintage look. So it has definitely seen some restoration over the years, but it looks and just feels right. And I believe that's always the objective of the colonial revival style that everybody seems to love so much.
Yorktown's earliest residents have faded from memory, and in many cases we only catch small glimpses of them through old court records. But every now and then, those records give us a clear picture of who someone was. Such is the case with Mungo Somerwell.
The sign says the first reference to Somerwell is from the 1702 court papers that say he requested a license for operating a ferry. And his old house is now a confectionery shop called the Little York Confectionery. So this spot right here belonged to Mungo Somerwell, an early Yorktown jack of all trades before the Revolutionary War kicked off. You can definitely see some age at the Somerwell house. Very old looking brick. But court records show that he wasn't just a ferryman. He was also a merchant, ran an ordinary, and served as the town constable. So with him being a ferryman, if you wanted to cross the York River, you more than likely would have paid Mungo. And it does say in 1935 and 36 the National Park Service restored the house to its colonial appearance and utilized it for park headquarters and the visitor center. And we'll take a walk back to the backyard area, see what it's looking like here at old Mungo's house. And Yorktown definitely wasn't just the big names like Nelson and Diggs. It was folks like Somerwell who kept the town running behind the scenes. And this house site helps us remember that Yorktown was built by everyday people doing all kinds of work and not just the big revolutionary players. And it was once referred to as the Lightfoot House after Philip Lightfoot, who first purchased the property in 1716 as a rental investment. So it's possible that he and not Mungo Somerwell built the current building. And when he died around 1706, the court ordered his widow to have everything appraised. And his property was known to have included warehouses too, which means he was likely tied into the trade scene, just like the big merchants in town. And Mungo actually died pretty young and left a full working estate behind. And that definitely says something about how hard of a working man he was. He had a pretty impressive home that he once lived in here off of Main Street. And here we are, nearly all the way back at the other end of Main Street at the medical shop. a reconstruction of the location that Dr. Corbin Griffin once worked from, a prominent Yorktown physician active in the American Revolutionary War. It says during the siege of Yorktown, he was imprisoned by the British on a ship anchored in the York River. And during his confinement, his cellar down the waterside was pilfered by sailors from the British sloop Bonetta, while other British troops took items from his medical shop. So as he was imprisoned and confined, his medical shop here was broken into, with more than likely many of his medical supplies being stolen. So it's pretty interesting to realize that he wasn't just a surgeon, he was actually with the Virginia forces during the Revolutionary War. So imagine being the town doctor treating the wounded during the siege, the British actually capturing him and transporting him directly behind us right out there, locking him up on a prison ship right there on the York River. So an unfortunate series of events that happened for Dr. Griffin. So this little corner was once a place of medicine as well as mercy, and ended up right in the path of war. But Griffin's role as both a healer and a patriot definitely still echoes here.
After a full day of exploring historic Yorktown, the last Main Street location I came to on my walking tour held many layers of history beneath it. This was the original lot where the first courthouse once stood, and over the years, 4 others have followed, including the former courthouse that still remains here today. Now known as York Hall, this building serves as both a welcome center for visitors and a gathering place for locals, complete with a remarkable artisan gallery inside. With Main Street explored from end to end, there was still one more stop I felt drawn to see, a place that would bring my walk through Yorktown to a fitting close.
And that's going to complete the scenic walking tour of Main Street here in historic Yorktown. But before we end the video, I wanted to drop into the Grace Church Cemetery, the most historic church here in Yorktown, and pay my respects to Thomas Nelson Jr. I feel like I got to know a lot about him in the making of this video, and although not mentioned nearly enough as he deserves in one of my more recent story documentaries called Yorktown 1781 Echoes from the Battlefield, I have since then learned more about his life and that he was actually buried in Yorktown at this very cemetery. So I'm going to locate a stone and pay my respects. The sign says Grace Church, circa 1697. This was a religious centerpiece in Yorktown's history and has endured 2 wars, a devastating fire, and at times the crumbling of old age, while continuing to serve as a place of worship for over 300 years. And an interesting discovery here at the side of the church, it shows the different layers underneath it. The restored finish, which is multi-layered stucco, the original structure, marl from York River bank, bounded by mortar of burnt shells and sand, and the original finish, which is a multi-layered stucco of burned shells and sand as well. The original structure right there of Grace Church from the 17th century. And there's just something grounding about ending our walk here, where one of America's founding voices is buried in the city he called home. Nelson Jr. died in 1789, just a few years after the war ended, tired and in debt, but still respected by everyone he knew. And it says General Thomas Nelson Jr., patriot soldier, Christian gentleman, born December 18, 1738, died January 2nd, 1789. Mover of the resolution of May 5th, 1776, in the Virginia Convention, instructing her delegates in Congress to move that body to declare the colonies free and independent states, signer of the Declaration of Independence, war governor of Virginia, commander of Virginia forces, with the reminder that he gave all for liberty. It's easy to walk past a grave, but this one, it belongs to a man who helped make the idea of America real. From tea protests to cannon fire, to the main street of Yorktown, to the quiet graves here at Grace Church's cemetery, Yorktown's history really does come full circle here.